O righteous Father. Do you know that's the only time in the Bible that God's ever given that title? Now, God's often said to be righteous, and God's often called Father. But nowhere else in the Bible that I'm aware of is God addressed as, O righteous Father. In fact, when you think about those two words, they seem to contradict each other. How can God be a righteous judge? That's what it means, righteous and just. Judge that's going to punish all sin, hates all sin. How can he be a judge and then a father at the same time to sinners? You see, the world never puts those two ideas together. In the world today, we have some people that believe God's a terrifying judge. And we have others that believe that God is an indulgent father. But an unbeliever doesn't believe that God is a righteous father. So let's look at those two words. God is righteous. God is just. God is a judge who punishes the guilty. I like what one old Puritan said. He said, outside of Christ, God is not all mercy and honey. People like to make God out of their own image so that they can get along with him, not have to worry about him. He's just a sweet old grandfather up there in heaven. Outside of Christ, God is terrifying. Or to use the old English word, outside of Christ, God is terrible. He is a judge, a righteous and just judge who will punish every wrong and reward every right. Punish all sin, reward all goodness, with a strict, inflexible standard of justice, which is his own holy and unblemished character. So that either you have to die, God's justice demands that either you have to die or Jesus has to die or God's justice has to die. God just can't say, well, let's let bygones be bygones. You know, what's the old crazy hymn that he always says, I forgive. No, he doesn't. It cost him his son to forgive us of our sins. He just didn't say, well, forget all those things I said about going to hell if you're a sinner. I just forgive everybody. That means his justice is dead. People don't believe in his justice these days anyway. So we know God's justice is not going to die because God is his justice. And God is eternal and unchangeable and infinite. We know there are going to be a lot of people that die because of God's justice and be sentenced to hell because of their sins. We also know that we are not going to die and go to hell as Christians because this righteous God is righteous. See, there's two senses in which we must take God's righteousness, at least two. First is he's just and he punishes all sin. Secondly, he's righteous in that he sent his son to satisfy his wrath, to satisfy the claims of God's law against us, so that he can forgive us on that basis of our sins. And God's not going to go back on the death of Christ. That God is the just and the justifier of the one that believes in Jesus. He's righteous, and you cling to that if you're a Christian. God sent his son to be the propitiation for us, to die in our place, to satisfy God's law, that we might be saved. Take comfort in God's righteousness. But if you're not a Christian, let God's righteousness and justice scare you to death because he is inflexible. And he's a righteous father. And the only reason he can be a father is because he's righteous. The only reason he can be the father of all those who belong to Jesus is because he has sent his son to satisfy his law against us.